Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today to learn more about CASEL's SEL District Resource Center. We're very excited to walk through the updates and enhancements and to share the different resources that are now available through this District Resource Center. But before we begin, I'll review just a few nuts and bolts of the webinar with you. We will be accepting questions throughout the webinar, and we'll hold a Q&A session at the end of the walkthrough of the District Resource Center. We'll also be answering some of the questions that many of you asked when you registered for the webinar. If you've got a question that comes up during the presentation, just type your question into the control panel in the questions box, push send, and I'll put it in the queue to be answered during that Q&A period at the end. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, you can use that same questions feature to get my attention, and I'll do my best to resolve the problem for you. A common problem is disruptions in audio, and sometimes that can just be caused by poor bandwidth. It takes a lot of bandwidth to run these webinars, so if that does happen for you, you might try disconnecting from the computer audio and calling in on a landline. That phone number is provided in your control panel. We'll also be sharing a recording of the webinar along with the presentation slides, so keep an eye on your email tomorrow for details on how to access those materials through the CASEL website. Now let's get started. I'm pleased to welcome today's speakers, Melissa Schlinger and Justina Schlund, both with CASEL. As Vice President of Practice and Programs, Melissa leads CASEL's efforts to advance systemic implementation of evidence-based social and emotional learning in school districts across the nation. She oversees CASEL's Collaborating Districts Initiative, also known as CDI, which has grown under her leadership from 8 to 18 large urban districts, all implementing systemic SEL. She also oversees the development of school and district resources based on CDI learnings, as well as CASEL support services. As a key member of CASEL's leadership team, Melissa collaborates with many organizations to advance CASEL's mission of making social and emotional learning an integral part of pre-K-12 education for all students in the nation. Melissa is also a former educator in the Fairfax County, Virginia Public Schools and is an active Big Sister through Big Brothers Big Sisters in Chicago, where she resides with her husband and twins. Melissa is joined today by Justina Schlund, who oversees the efforts to translate essential learning from the field into resources and professional development that support systemic SEL implementation. Prior to joining CASEL, Justina was the Executive Director of Chicago Public Schools Office of Social and Emotional Learning, where she led district-wide improvement strategies to foster supportive learning environments to promote the social and emotional development of all students. Melissa and Justina have a lot to show us today. We are going to dive deep into the District Resource Center, so I'm going to go ahead and turn the program over to Melissa to get us started.
Thanks, Emily, and thank you all for joining us. We're going to spend just a couple of minutes on some background information before we launch into the presentation that Justina will share on the District Resource Center. I think many of you on the line probably already know CASEL and our mission to help make social and emotional learning a critical part of education for all students. We do that through efforts around advancing the science, the research on SEL. We also have a group of folks focused on state and local and federal policy. And Justina and I work in our practice team to really try to bring everything that we're learning into the field and support systemic SEL at the school and district level. By way of background also, Justina, next slide, please. Just briefly on what social and emotional learning is. This is not a presentation that's going to go deep in a number of areas that some of you may be very interested in, but we will point you in the direction of other information and places to get that. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on what SEL is, other than to just remind everyone about CASEL's definition that we're thinking about this as a process through which both children and adults can acquire and apply knowledge, attitudes, and skills that they need to manage emotions, set goals, feel and show empathy, establish relationships, and make good decisions. You'll see here the CASEL wheel that many folks are familiar with that provides information about the 5 competency areas, self-management and self-awareness, which help us think about our own thoughts and feelings and how we behave with those. There's also the social awareness and relationship skills, which have to do with how we interact, how we understand and interact with others, and then how we pull that together into problem solving and responsible decision making. You'll also notice the CASEL wheel includes rings around it because we like to communicate about where these social and emotional competencies are promoted, not just in the classroom, but also throughout the school and in partnership with families and community members. This model, I think a lot of folks are familiar with, and in some ways it's sort of abstract. Another way that we've been helping folks to understand what we mean by systemic SEL is by talking about what you would actually see in a school that is implementing SEL systemically. So we have developed this list of 10 indicators that you'd see in a school that's really thinking through promotion of SEL in the classroom, school, with families and communities. You'll see on this list everything from the explicit SEL instruction, as well as opportunities to embed SEL with the academic instruction, as well as music, PE, art. You'll see an emphasis on youth voice and engagement. Obviously, we want to have a supportive classroom and school climate, which we know is important for promoting social and emotional competence. There's also information about how we think about adult SEL and also the role of the supportive discipline policy. A continuum of integrated support is important to think about tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 levels of support. Information about family and community partnerships, and of course, always thinking about continuous improvement. We're not going to spend a lot of time today on school-wide SEL, although I will say the questions that we received in advance of this webinar, there were a significant number of questions that were related to school-wide SEL. We have some resources that are available on our website, including a guide for school-wide SEL. So you'll hear both myself and Justina refer to our school guide. That can be accessed at the website that you see here, schoolguide.casel.org. That will give you everything that you need to know at a school level for how to achieve those 10 indicators that I just mentioned. It takes you through a process for how to achieve that. It includes a rubric that allows you to reflect on the work that you're doing and also helps you build action plans and see guidance for how to achieve school-wide SEL. The whole process is driven by continuous improvement. Again, that's not the focus of this webinar, but I did want to make sure people were aware of it since so many of the questions were related to school-level SEL. Another big category of questions that we saw in the pre-questions had to do with assessment. I wanted to make sure that everyone was also aware of our SEL assessment guide that was recently launched. This is a resource that will allow you to select and effectively use assessments. You can see the different assessments that are out there, different uses of them, different frameworks, and it should help you with your focus on assessing social and emotional competence. We recommend that schools and districts think about a strengths-based approach, and that when you're looking at SEL assessment, you're also looking at that alongside of attendance, behavior, achievement data, and looking at climate data, looking at graduation rates, looking at a holistic picture of what's happening at a school. So again, we're not going to spend a lot of time on these resources, but you can find on our website recordings of webinars that focus on these, and also you can go directly to these resources, which are free to look at and to get information about. What we're going to focus on today is our district work, and I wanted to mention the way in which CASEL thinks about systemic SEL. So up here you see a brief summary of what some of the research outcomes that we know can result from systemic SEL, both long-term and short-term outcomes. At the bottom of this slide, there's a link. When you receive this slide deck, you can click on that link that will take you to a whole PowerPoint presentation on details around outcomes that are related to SEL, everything from academic outcomes to life outcomes to cost-benefit analysis and so forth. But we know from an abundance of research over the last 25 years, and especially in the last 5 years, that SEL can lead to really important outcomes, which is why we're doing this. Our model of systemic SEL then says, if you want to get these outcomes, we want to promote social and emotional competence in our schools through what we do in our classroom, school, and homes and communities, this is, again, the wheel. The other piece, though, is the how. So the how relates to CASEL's theory of action, and we have a theory of action at our schools and a theory of action at our districts, both of which examine 4 main areas of effort that can lead you to promoting SEL, that can lead you to those outcomes. So for today, we're going to be talking about the district theory of action. We're going to look at these 4 areas. What do we need to do at a district level to achieve systemic SEL at a district? There are 4 main areas. The first one has to do with building a foundational support and plan. This is critically important. Sometimes we see districts jump right in and without a strong foundation in place, and we've seen that the foundation can really help bolster the efforts of your SEL implementation. If you've taken the time to develop a shared vision, that you have a communication strategy so that people understand what this is and that it's a priority, that you have thought about how your district is organized to support collaboration, and that you have a sufficient budget and other resources like professional learning time and staffing to support an SEL implementation that is systemic. That's all part of focus area 1. Focus areas 2 and 3 is really the meat on the bone. Focus area 2 is where we're talking about what are we doing with our adults? How do we build the expertise of our adults at the district office? How do we create a professional learning program that is not just for teachers, but for central office staff and all departments for the cabinet level, and also bus drivers and security officers? How do we do a robust professional learning plan? How do we actually strengthen the adult's own social and emotional and cultural competence? And by that, we mean their own ability to manage emotions, to set goals, to manage conflict, and to be culturally responsive in their instruction. And also, how do we promote community and trust and collective efficacy among our staff? We know that when the staff at the district and school level, when they together recognize that they are part of a group, that they have community and trust, and that they recognize that together they can achieve goals, these are really important foundations for success. For students, of course, our ultimate goal is also to promote social emotional competence for students. One key way that we think districts need to be focusing on is making sure that the district's been clear about what it is that kids should know and be able to do at different age levels and grade levels. For example, what you might expect in terms of empathy or conflict management for a kindergartner would be very different than for a 5th grader or an 11th grader and so forth. So districts taking time to either focus on a state standards or develop standards so that we're clear on what are we trying to accomplish at each grade level. Also, we know there's a critically important role for evidence-based programs and practices, which can be implemented in classrooms. The evidence-based programs can be really effective for that explicit instruction, and many evidence-based programs also can support integration into academics or how to create a positive climate. There's information on CASEL's website about how to select an evidence-based program through our program review guide, which you'll also see in the District Resource Center. But this is a critically important piece as well. And then, of course, how do we engage with families and community partners to help bolster those efforts and to make sure that we are all working together in collaboration, and wanting to make sure that SEL isn't something that we just do in a lesson, but we're actually integrating it in with academics, in with our other priorities, in with our policies. And by policies, we mean discipline policies, hiring policies. How are we thinking about how SEL shows up in these places? The last area on our district framework has to do with looking at and informing our work through data and continuous improvement processes. So really, it's kind of confusing to put this last because continuous improvement occurs at every level. But we want to make sure that that is an effort that drives the entire implementation. So this framework is what CASEL has developed in collaboration with districts over the last several years. And this is actually what we're going to be talking about today, is the District Resource Center, which we've developed in collaboration around these areas. So in order to do that, we've been working with districts since 2011 in the Collaborating Districts Initiative. This initiative was launched to study and support systemic SEL in districts, in large urban districts. And our research questions that we originally were setting out to answer were, what does it mean to do this systemically? And our answer to that has been the theory of action I just reviewed. The second question was, is it feasible to do that, knowing what we know about the complexity of large urban districts, the amount of turnover that you see, the budget crunches? Is that a feasible thing to do? And I will tell you, we weren't sure, which is why we started with 8 districts. We thought we might lose a few along the way. And the third one was, when we do that, what kinds of outcomes would you see for students? We started with these 8 districts that you see here. And just really quickly, we found that the answers to those questions were that yes, it is feasible. In fact, all 8 of those districts continue to partner with CASEL, and we have seen additional districts join our community of partnerships to be a part of that learning, to receive technical assistance, and to convene with the others to learn from them. So not only did we not lose any, we've gained a thriving community of districts, which allows us to continue to understand our learning around systemic SEL. We also know, and again, I'm not highlighting it today, that the outcomes that we saw from these 8 districts were really positive. They were very reflective of the data that we've seen in other research. We saw improvements in academics. We continue to see improvements in attendance and graduation rates, in climate, in behavior and discipline incidents. So we've seen really great data. These are the districts that together have helped us become smarter about SEL. And what the District Resource Center is designed to do is share what we've learned from working with these districts with you. Next. So the District Resource Center, we've just launched a 2019 update. We actually launched this a couple of years ago, and it was launched, and since that time, we have evolved our District Resource Center to reflect our newest theory of action, so all 16 key activities. For those of you that are familiar with our earlier version, there were 10. We've added new key activities and new content areas. Since 2016, we know this has become a tremendous resource for districts around the country and actually around the world. All 50 states have been accessing the District Resource Center, and 148 countries have been coming to this as the place to learn about systemic SEL. Our new version has new organization around this theory of action. We have a new district rubric to allow you to assess your own implementation that Justina will show you. We are really excited about the new elevated focus on equity. We've learned from our districts and from the research that SEL is a critical lever in our mission to achieve equitable outcomes. So there's information now about how we are thinking about SEL in service of equity. There's a lot more content on what we do with adults, how we engage with families and communities, and a lot more resources to share with you as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Justina, who's going to take you on a tour of the actual District Resource Center, which can be launched at drc.casel.org.
Great, thank you so much, Melissa. So I am clicking now into our website. Again, if you're following along, it's drc.casel.org. And when you get here, what you'll see on our homepage is a couple of different ways to begin to navigate this page. So first, at the very top, you'll see kind of an introduction to the District Resource Center and a button to go to a How It Works page that we'll navigate to in a minute. And this will provide a summary of those 4 focus areas that Melissa just described and provide some additional context for the DRC. As you move down this page, you'll see a couple other options. A What is SEL page that will provide some helpful kind of basics around what is SEL and what is the research behind SEL. This could be a good place to start if you're new to SEL and want to learn a little bit more about the basics. We'll also talk a little bit more about our SEL and Equity page that Melissa was referencing in the overview. And then lastly, the other place you might want to begin is by taking a priority setting questionnaire. That's just a very quick questionnaire around a few questions that help you kind of think about your SEL needs and where you are right now and your priorities. And it could be a good place to point you in the right direction. From any of these pages, you'll notice that there is a top navigation bar that'll quickly take you back to the home page or to any of these pages that we're going to talk about momentarily. The last thing I'll just show you quickly on the home page before we get into the rest of the content is that there is a link to the CASEL Guide to Schoolwide SEL. That's the resource that Melissa was mentioning earlier, that if you're looking for more guidance around how do you do this work in a school or how do you support schools and really thinking about implementation, this is a great place to go to, and you can find this. You can click to this from the Resource Center or by going to schoolguide.casel.org. We're going to start with the How It Works page. As I mentioned, this is kind of a helpful page to think about the context behind the DRC. You'll see at the very top of this page, there's an introductory video. We're not going to play this right now, but you might want to watch it in your own time. That'll provide a little bit more about what the district framework is and how to think about navigating through the DRC and where this all comes from. And then what you'll see is that that district framework that Melissa just described with the 4 focus areas is outlined below. So you'll find that within the district framework, you'll see the 4 focus areas. And within each of the focus areas are key activities, which are essentially the critical district actions for implementation to implement this focus area. Melissa alluded to this, but we generally recommend that if you're getting started with implementation, that you begin with focus area 1 to really lay that strong foundation, develop a strong plan, think about how your resources align to the work that you're doing. And then many districts will work on focus area 2 and focus area 3 at the same time so that you're thinking about strategies that both strengthen adult SEL as well as promote SEL for students because those feed off of each other. And then continuous improvement. This focus area really takes districts through a year-long continuous improvement cycle for SEL implementation. And this really begins at the beginning of the year all the way through the end of the year. So you'll want to navigate through these key activities as you're going through implementation. So for now, let's take a look at a couple of these key activities. So I'm going to go to the Adult SEL and Cultural Competence activity, which is a new key activity in our District Resource Center, and one that really came out of our learnings with those districts that Melissa talked about in the Collaborating Districts Initiative, where we really found that in order to really focus on student-level SEL, districts were really having to think very holistically about how to strengthen adult social, emotional, and cultural competence. So this key activity kind of takes you through all of those learnings that we have, and all of the key activities are set up in a very similar format, so you'll be able to navigate them very easily. I'll take you through this one right now. So when you get to the key activity overview page, what you'll find first is a description of what it is that we're talking about. What does high quality implementation look like, and what does it mean? And each of these sections connect to a rubric that helps you think about your current level of implementation around strengthening staff social, emotional, and cultural competence, or whatever area that you're focused on. So that's found in all of the sections under the What Is section. And then the rest of this overview page will kind of provide some guidance around why this is important, including links to relevant research, as well as when should districts begin thinking about this area of implementation and who should be involved. On the next page, in this key activity, you'll find a step-by-step process of how to implement this activity. So throughout the steps, You'll see that there's embedded tools and resources that you can download and use. And this tool that I'll click on and show you really quickly is the Personal Assessment and Reflection tool. This is a really popular tool that districts have used that really begin conversations with staff about their own SEL competencies. It's kind of a low-risk, insightful way to reflect on their strengths and areas of growth. And any of these resources, if you set up an account, it's a free account. If you set up an account, you'll be able to download, save them to your computer, and I'll also show you in a minute how you can save them to your free account. The next page, after you navigate through this process that takes you through how to think about and do this key activity, the next page you'll see is all of the resources pulled together. And these are all organized in a very similar way. So it has resources that provide you with, first, sort of a behind-the-scenes look of how districts have strategized and planned, as well as ready-to-use tools and presentation templates that you can take and apply to your own context. There are also artifacts from districts and schools that show you how they've publicized and shared their work. And there's resources such as articles and webinars that can help you learn more about the topic. Let's take a look. We'll take a look at one more key activity before I show you some of the other pages. So one of the key activities that Melissa had mentioned was the activity around integration of SEL. We found this to be critically important that as districts are implementing SEL, that we really don't want this to be a separate program, a separate initiative, but something that really drives how we're doing all of our work in the district. So for thinking about student SEL, we really want to think about all of the ways in which districts impact students' daily experiences in schools. And there are three kind of very critical areas that we found through our learnings with other districts have been really important to integrate with, and that's academics, discipline, and student support services or multi-tiered systems of support. So again, on this overview page, you'll find the what, why, and who on this page, including the link to the rubric items that are related here. And then on the process page for this one, we've set up kind of three separate sets of steps for integrating with academics, for integrating with discipline, and for integrating with student support services. So I'll jump down to student support services, which I know is on a lot of folks' minds. And they submitted some questions around thinking about multi-tiered systems of support or PBIS. And so here you'll see that there is this step-by-step guidance again. And really the way that we think about SEL as integrating with any of these frameworks is that SEL is really critical to both how students learn academic content as well as how they behave and navigate throughout a school. And so thinking about this integration means really considering how SEL is embedded into all of these different systems. So here you'll see kind of guidance around how districts have thought about this integration of SEL in universal supports as well as higher level of supports. And you'll also see some discussion around mental health services and how that's distinguished from SEL. There are several questions that were raised about that connection. And in this step, you'll see that there's a link to a blog post from CASEL's assessment work group that has some discussion around strengths-based assessment, as well as how this differentiates from screening for emotional or behavioral problems. Coming back to the District Resource Center here, I will navigate back up to the resources page just to show you quickly here a couple things that you can find. One of the things that Melissa had mentioned as she was showing the overall theory of action is that there is a presentation that helps make that connection between the research and the evidence base for SEL and how it leads to outcomes such as academic achievement. You'll find that presentation linked here as well as throughout other sections of the District Resource Center. You'll also see that there are things like a template PowerPoint that Sacramento used to introduce restorative practices in the classroom as a way to bring integration of SEL and discipline practices. let's move away from some of the key activities now. So again, you'll find all the key activities by clicking on District Framework, and you can quickly navigate to any of them. But I'm going to show you a couple of the other pages that you can get to in the District Resource Center. One is that I mentioned that all of these key activities are connected to rubric items that let you think very intentionally about your current level of implementation at the district. Most districts we know are not starting from square one with SEL, and they've already done a lot of work. So you can do a couple things here. You can either download a full printable version of all of the items of this district rubric, and these all align with sections of the key activities in the District Resource Center. Or you can view each focus area at a time and download these separately. So if you're thinking really just about getting started and organizing right now, you might want to just focus and hone in on focus area 1. So you might want to take the rubric here. Just to note that this rubric right now, we are working on building this out to be a fully interactive rubric, so stay tuned for future updates. The other thing is, if you're looking for a rubric for school level work, on our school guide that we had mentioned earlier, you'll find a fully interactive rubric that allows schools to think for themselves around their level of implementation on each of these focus areas. And this is an interactive rubric that allows schools to kind of save their scores to an account, free account, create a plan, set goals, and track those goals and action steps. So encourage you to check that out in the rubric. Moving back to the top navigation now, I'm going to jump over here to the SEL and Equity page. As Melissa mentioned, this has been a big area of priority as our work with districts have evolved. We found that districts across the country have really seen some deep connections between their SEL and equity efforts and have really been positioning SEL as a way to promote equity. So what you'll find here is an entire landing page dedicated to this discussion around SEL as a lever for equity. Which starts with kind of some core beliefs around SEL as a way to promote understanding, examine biases, close opportunity gaps, and create more inclusive schools. And this also includes a worksheet that can be used to reflect on how your own beliefs connect to district actions around SEL. You'll also see that there is a page that helps make explicit the ways that the 5 SEL competencies connect to how students and adults understand their own social cultural identities, how they build relationships across differences and understand diversity, and how they consider their own impact on equity when making decisions. So this is kind of some thinking that we're doing around how each of these competencies really make deep connections to equity. The next page you'll find on here is some considerations that help you think through each of the focus areas that are discussed in the District Resource Center from an equity lens. And these considerations and this notion of SEL as a lever for equity is embedded within each of these key activities, but they're really pulled out explicitly here so that you can make those connections very clearly. And then lastly, the equity resources page here provides just a list of resources from CASEL and other organizations if you want to explore the connections between SEL and equity more deeply. For example, here at the very top is a brief that CASEL has done that really thinks about SEL through a cultural and historical context. So if you're looking for some deeper analysis and reading, it's right there for you. And speaking of resources, I think the last page that's linked up here is the resources page. And so again, in each of the key activities, you'll have a resource page dedicated to each of that activities, but then you can find all of the hundreds of resources that CASEL has put on the DRC by coming to the resources page here. And then there's a couple ways that you can easily navigate through all of those resources. So one way is you can just browse by alphabetically by all these different topics that have been kind of hot topics that districts have wanted to address in their SEL implementation. Assessment was a big question that we heard from a lot of folks in preparation for this webinar. So if you click on the assessment button, you'll see that the assessment topic, you'll see that there's all these different documents in the DRC related to assessment. And then you can easily filter these by how they connect to each of the key activities, or from where they come from, or by the type of resource that you're looking for. And one that I'll just point out really quickly, if you do have a lot of questions around assessment, right at the very top here is the CASEL assessment guide, which is an entire resource that's dedicated to supporting practitioners in selecting a strengths-based SEL assessment to support their implementation and really connect to their district standards and curricular goals. The other way that you can kind of navigate through the resources is by going through each of the key activities. So again, if you're looking for resources that are specifically devoted to professional learning or dedicated to family and community partnerships, you can find that here and it'll take you to that resource page for each key activity. And then the last way you could search for these resources is very simply by clicking the magnifying glass to do a search. Youth voice has been a topic that many people implementing SEL have been interested in. So if you click on youth voice, if you search youth voice, you'll find all the resources that connect to youth voice. And so one of them here that I'll just highlight is Washoe County's Student Voice homepage, which is an incredibly helpful and comprehensive web page around all of the work that Washoe County has done around student voice, including an annual Strength and Voices conference where students are really the leaders in discussing their school climate and SEL and school level data. And then coming back to the resources page, what I'll show you really quickly is that if you are logged in, if you have an account, and again, the account is free to create, if you have this account, you can easily save any of these resources by clicking this bookmark over here. And then if you navigate to your account, you can see all of your saved resources in one place. So you can put all your favorite resources into your account so that you'll be able to access them easily right from the DRC website. Great, and that, I think that pretty much does it for the tour of the DRC, and happy to open it up to any questions now.
Great. Well, thank you, Justina, and thank you, Melissa, too, for that introduction. We do have some questions that have come in and some, obviously, that were sent in as people registered, so we'll go ahead and dive into those. So starting with a question that came in from a registrant before the webinar, what are some recommendations for getting buy-in from district leaders who are not yet aware of the urgency and importance of developing these SEL skills?
Great. That's a great question and one that we receive all the time. So I would say there's a couple things that you might want to take a look at in the District Resource Center if you're thinking about buy-in. One is, if you're thinking about buy-in, you're really thinking about that foundational level of support again. So I'd encourage anyone who is thinking about this to begin with setting a shared vision. We find that often that the way to create buy-in is to really ensure that all critical stakeholders are at the table when you're really thinking about the why behind SEL, when you're really thinking about why is this important, why are we bringing this to our district. So I'd say you want to begin here with shared vision, and you also want to probably be thinking about your communication strategy to make all those reasons very, very clear. A couple other places I might point to. One is that we had talked about that resource that's a template for making the case. And you can find this at a couple different places, but I'm gonna go to integration that we showed you before, and there's the presentation template for the case for SEL. This allows you to download a PowerPoint that really has all of the research kind of summarized in an easy to understand way, so that folks can kind of start making those connections between SEL and all of the outcomes that you're trying to promote. And then the last thing I'll just point out on the District Resource Center is that there is a host of different videos on here, especially those from superintendents who have, from leading districts across the nation, who have spoken about why they brought SEL to their district and why it's a high priority for them. So you might want to be thinking about how that relates to your district, and you could do that by searching superintendent.
Excellent. And just a second here, I'll chat out some other links that Justina had shared that are in the District Resource Center, so you can add those to what she has just shared here. But before I do that, we'll move on to the next question. And this actually was asked both before the webinar, and we've had it asked during the webinar, so clearly a hot topic. Do you feel that the resources in the District Resource Center can be used to support out-of-school time programs?
Great. Yes. So absolutely. The District Resource Center and the School Guide have been informed by a partnership that we've had not only with districts, but also with out-of-school time programs. This was through a partnership funded by the Wallace Foundation, and we've really had some deep learnings around what does it mean to partner and align the work that we're doing in school and out-of-school time. So a lot of these learnings are embedded throughout the district framework, both in the family and community partnership section, which talks very explicitly about aligning some of these areas of work with out-of-school time partners, as well as throughout other sections that really embed kind of thinking about out-of-school time partners and other community partners in the visioning process, in key stakeholders, in communication strategies, and in any professional learning that you're doing. The other thing I'll mention is that on the School Guide, again, you can navigate to that from the homepage here. On the School Guide, we've embedded all those same considerations, including thinking about school-based out-of-school time partners as members of a school-wide SEL team. And the School Guide contains a whole host of resources that are dedicated to out-of-school time. So you can click on any of the resources that are for a general audience, and also see one that has a version that's specifically for out-of-school time partners.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. This next question is a very tactical question about the center. Are there Spanish versions of some of the PDF learning activities or rubrics?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are some Spanish versions embedded throughout the website, particularly on the Family and Community Partnerships, in the Family and Community Partnerships section. I have not actually searched for Spanish here, but there you go. If you do a search for Spanish, you'll actually see some Spanish PDFs and content here. So you could do that, and they're all called out as Spanish in parentheses in the title.
Right, that's definitely a handy resource. So this is a question about both the District Resource Center and the School Guide. Do you recommend a school within a district also work through the school-wide guide while the district works through the DRC? And this is specifically in the case of a public charter school that seeks to expand their SEL. Should they look at the DRC or the school-wide to guide their process?
That's a great question. The short answer is yes, we absolutely recommend that districts that are supporting schools in doing this work, and schools that are part of districts that are doing this work, are using the two in tandem. The nice thing is that both the district framework and the school framework are built around these same 4 focus areas. So the specific activities underneath them look a little bit different at the school level versus the district level for good reason, but the overarching cycle of implementation is exactly the same at the district and the school level. what we've seen be really helpful in districts that we've worked with is that districts are working through their own kind of district-wide plan. At the same time, they are providing professional learning to schools around the school guide. So they are using the school guide as a structure for how to guide schools through their implementation. And this all rolls up into a district-wide kind of plan. And what you'll find in the district framework is ways to think about kind of how you're looking across the board at all the schools to look at their current needs and resources. You'll find them in the shared vision and plan. And you'll also find throughout Focus Area 4 considerations for thinking about school level implementation at a district level.
That's a really great run through of how those two work hand in hand and support each other. So thanks for asking that question and for answering it, Justina. So maybe you can point to some resources about some specific situations that some of our attendees are having, starting with a district has implemented an SEL program, but they missed some steps and didn't get buy-in. Do you have some suggestions for resources that might help them kind of restart and rebuild so that the program is more effective?
Yes, I'm hearing the word program, and I think it could be understood in two different frameworks, two different ways. So one, if you're talking about a very specific evidence-based program that you've implemented, such as Second Step or Collaborative Classroom or any of the other number of SEL programs that are out there, you might want to begin with the Adopt and Implement Evidence-Based Programs and Practices section, which really talk about how you use these types of very specific programs to drive implementation. And there's a number of different resources that help you think through what are the right programs, how do you promote high quality implementation of those programs through that. So you might want to begin here. If you are thinking about program largely like an SEL initiative that you're restarting district-wide, again, what I would say is I think a helpful place to start is by going to the rubric here. So if you've been implementing SEL for a while and you're not sure kind of what's not making it stick, that's where this rubric comes in to help you think about what are all the critical areas of implementation. And as you think very specifically through each area, you might see, what we haven't done quite as much, although we have created a budget for SEL, we've created a vision, maybe we haven't provided enough support to strengthen central office SEL expertise, and therefore I might want to use this information to go back to the district framework and say, okay, now I really want to hone in on this key activity. So I think if you're talking about an SEL initiative overall, what you might want to just do is get a sense of where you are and how that connects to each of the key activities that we've laid out here.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think that the rubric, I agree with Justina, that the rubric is a great place to do some self-assessment of what you've already done and then figure out how to maybe go back and focus on some additional things that you want to bolster. This can be overwhelming when you look at 16 activities that you're supposed to be doing. We definitely don't expect that districts can focus their attention on all 16 of these. Generally speaking, districts choose anywhere from 3 to maybe 5 areas that they want to focus on. So we certainly don't think that it's reasonable that you are doing all of these things all the time. So instead of getting overwhelmed with it, definitely recommend filling out the rubric, and after you've filled out the rubric, ask yourself and your team, which of these things do we want to prioritize? And you can decide prioritizing based on where you have lowest scores or where you haven't done some of the early work, but try not to get overwhelmed with the sheer number and just focus on what you want to do. I think another key to success there is coming back to that, collecting some data. Like if you decide that you're going to build some central office expertise, find out what is the current level of expertise and what is your goal. How will you know if you did that sufficiently? Is it because you went from a 1 to a 3 on the rubric? Is it because your central office has taken a survey and they have showed a certain number of gains? So always thinking about what is our baseline, what is our goal, and how do we know if we've achieved it is a key. But definitely try not to get overwhelmed with trying to fill out the whole rubric at a 4. It can take years, and does take years, to really deepen implementation.
And just one last thing on this: if you are thinking about which areas to prioritize, a helpful tool is in the Vision and Plan key activity, where you'll find a blank SEL planning template and a workbook that really helps you take those rubric scores that you had and set some goals around them and identify those 3 to 5 priority areas that Melissa's talking about.
Thank you. And Melissa and Justina, that really dovetails nicely into this next question. And I think you've answered a lot around this question, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it because there's something in there specifically that you might want to add on to. We're a small district and have some pockets of strength in place. I have done the assessment, but still don't know where to start to implement. We are far along in PBIS and starting MTSS. How do I start SEL without overwhelming or adding a more to-do perception to our district?
Yeah, and I think that we did just sort of address that with some of the recommendations, but I would just also add that in small districts, what I have found is the school guide is a really, is a place that you'd want. Maybe your district only has like 5 to 10 schools or even less. Having schools thinking through what are we doing at the school level, and looking at, you know, what priorities they want to set at the school level can be really helpful. For some of the larger districts that we work with, they put out a 5-year plan and they roll out the school guide with support in cohorts of schools. In a smaller district, you may not need to do that. You may want to jump right into working with your, you know, SEL teams at your school level. But I think having, you know, going through some of the resources that Justina just mentioned, the blank SEL planning template, and thinking about how do we shore up what's happening at the district office and how do we engage our schools, thinking more systemically about their implementation can be helpful.
Great. Justina, maybe if you could, I'm not sure how this will work with your navigation, but we have referenced the school guide several times, and we've had some people who have just asked how to access that.
Sure. So there's a couple different ways. From the District Resource Center, the easiest way to navigate to it is from the home page. So again, from anywhere you get to the home page by clicking this District Resource Center button up here. And then at the bottom of the home page is a link to the CASEL Guide to Schoolwide SEL, which will take you there. You can also get here directly by going to schoolguide.casel.org. And you'll see that this page feels very similar to the DRC, but of course the content is slightly different here. But again, you'll be able to navigate to any of these focus areas and find additional resources that are really targeted around schools and what they can be doing.
Great, thank you.
Maybe you can show the how it works page, Justina, on the school guide, just to see the similarities. Again,
Sure.
I would encourage people to look at that video there, and you'll see the school-wide SEL process. If you scroll down, it's also, you know, we've broken out this key activity 1 into 2 sections. So again, there's information on how to build awareness, commitment, and ownership of your school staff and create a school level plan using the rubric. There's also then on the next section, what to do to strengthen adult SEL of your school staff and how to promote SEL for students in classrooms and throughout the halls, and of course, continuous improvement. So it's very similar. And I think there's also some important tools at the school level to be aware of in terms of tracking progress. If you click on track progress, not only will you see information about the rubric that we have at a school level and how to turn that into a plan, there's also a walkthrough protocol. So that will help you. If I were to walk through a school, what observable evidence would I look for to see if the school is systemically implementing SEL? And then also, how can I actually ask the staff themselves about the SEL implementation? So there's lots of tools for measuring school level implementation that are here on this.
And while we're here, I'll just show you that on the school guide, the rubric is actually an interactive rubric that allows schools to save all of this information to their account and use their rubric to identify goals. So that it's a really great tool if you are training schools on this.
Wonderful. And again, I think these two resources just work so nicely hand in hand, as I know you had planned. So it's good to get a little look inside the school guide as well. So we're running out of time, but we'll take one last question. Maybe, Justina, if you could point to some resources within the DRC that might be available for supporting SEL or trauma-informed SEL?
Yeah, sure. So trauma is obviously a topic that we've heard a lot about. I think a couple things. One is that we see deep connections between an SEL-informed environment and a trauma-sensitive environment. So in kind of what we know about how to create trauma-sensitive environments, creating a safe and supportive learning space, providing social and emotional supports and opportunities to build social emotional competencies. All of these are deeply connected to SEL. You can quickly navigate via the resources section. There is a topic on trauma here, and you can quickly navigate to both resources that have been developed by districts around this connection, as well as CASEL resources and other resources by kind of leading institutions around this.
Great, thank you. That is such an important topic, and I know many districts are really trying to make strides in that area. So I'm glad to see those great resources there. So we are running up against our time, but thank you again, Justina and Melissa, for taking us through the District Resource Center and sharing what's there. I know folks will want to spend some additional time in it. The URL is quite easy, but we'll also be including it in the email that goes out tomorrow that will link to the recording of the webinar. So if you want to revisit anything that Justina and Melissa shared with you, you'll be able to do that in the recording. We'll also be sharing the slide deck that Melissa went through, so you'll have access to that as well. And we also ask that when you log off the webinar today, if you wouldn't mind taking just a quick 5-question survey to provide us with some feedback, and it also provides the opportunity, if there's other specific topics that you'd be interested in having CASEL present on, you're welcome to share those with us, and we'll take those into consideration. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and a final thank you to Justina and Melissa, and of course to CASEL for bringing this District Resource Center to us and providing all of these great resources.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Justina.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.